Andrew, one of the questions that comes up all the time when we're trying to discern relationships between religions are the apparent, real, not the apparent, the real contradictions between them in radically, in such radical ways that it seems like it's not the same God. When you look at the Abrahamic religions, and certainly when you start adding Eastern religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, whatever. Now, some would take the lowest common denominator, that there's something real or there's something non-physical, there's some ground of being, and say all religions worship the same God. If you look at the three Abrahamic religions, you have pretty distinct differences, particularly the Trinity in the person of Jesus Christ is God incarnate, which seems to alienate it from Islam and Judaism. Mm-hmm. So how do you deal with the question? We all want social harmony, but in your secret recesses, you must say that I know better than you do.
Good. So as you say, there are major theological differences between all three religions, on the one hand, but on the other hand, they all see themselves as worshipping the God of Abraham. And in the Christian tradition, the fact that a recognition that there's a continuing recognition that we're continuing to worship the one God of Abraham, and that God is also triune and is the God that reveals himself in Jesus Christ. And one of the things that I think makes this question more interesting is when we look at the Apostle Paul. He's often seen as the kind of the archetype of Christian conversion, because as the story goes, Paul the Pharisee was walking along the road to Damascus as a Jew or Judean, and then he encounters Jesus Christ, and his life was turned around, and such that he came to recognize Jesus Christ as Lord. But after that experience, he continued to see himself as worshipping the God of Abraham that he had always worshipped. And not only that, he continued to see himself as a Jew, albeit a Jew whose religious perception was transformed and renewed under his recognition of the lordship of Jesus Christ.
Okay, so what does that imply in terms of relationship between original Judaism and Christianity, and then bring Islam into this as well?
Good. So one of the things that we see that in Paul's early thought is a recognition that both Jews and Gentiles don't need to take on the same kind of religious traditions in order to worship our Lord Jesus Christ. There's a sense in which Gentiles can continue to maintain distinctive aspects of their religious identity, and Jews are the same. And they shouldn't try to cross over between the two. And so there's a question, I think what's an interesting question for me, as to whether we can say the same about Muslims that become Christian. Is it the case that if a Muslim comes to recognize the lordship of Jesus Christ, that they need to get rid of all their distinctive Islamic practices? Or is there ways in which certain practices can be transformed under recognition of the lordship of Christ, so that they can continue to their particular rituals, albeit in a Christian way? And I think we should maintain open to that possibility.
So that's interesting. If your conclusion then is that Jews and Muslims do indeed worship the same God as the Christians do, worship the same God, even though there's obviously theological differences, and Christianity has certain, as you would think, kind of higher level understandings. But here's the critical question. So that if the Jew or the Muslim did not convert to Christianity, your example is when they did, are they still worshiping the same God? Which is a good entry question. But my question is, if they did not convert, but you have concluded that they're worshiping the same God, so didn't convert, but worshiping the same God according to your analysis, What happens to them when they die?
So I reckon that there's a possibility, in fact I think it is likely to happen, that they will encounter Jesus Christ when they die. And they'll have the opportunity to reinterpret who they are, their very identity, in light of encountering Jesus Christ.
So they won't have any advantage over a pagan Norseman from 500 BC or something who had no idea of Jesus Christ, wasn't even born yet or whatever. So the Jew and the Christian, with the Jew and the Muslim, who you say is worshiping the same God, will have to do the same thing that everybody else will. So the fact that they were worshiping the same God during their life gives them no advantage.
No, so the Christian isn't saved by Christian beliefs. The Christian recognizes that the person of Jesus Christ is their salvation. And by recognizing that, they come to live out a life that corresponds to their salvation. They live a life that looks saved in this world and corresponds to the kind of life they might be living in the new creation. But they don't see themselves as somehow saving themselves by forming Christian beliefs.
No, sure.
They just recognize that they come to worship the one who is their salvation. And I don't see any reason why we can't recognize that that person is also the salvation of Jews and Muslims.
No, sure, but they have to accept that. But so you're saying they have to accept that after death, or it's at some point. I mean,
there has to be a recognition of the lordship of Jesus Christ.
Right, so there's no entry into whatever just because they are worshiping in the best of their knowledge and heartfelt and sincerity and good deeds and whatever they need to do. They are doing that to the real God, because they're doing that in worship to the same God that is the God of the Christians. That's what you're saying. So they get no credit for any of that. They still have to go through that process.
I would say that Christians don't get any credit for all the Christian work that they do. And they don't do it to get credit. They do it because they love God and they love Jesus Christ and they respect who he is and they want to follow him. Not in order to get credit or to get into heaven.
Sure. But by worshiping the same God, you're not a step further along the path. You still have to do the same thing as if somebody who never even heard of the God, not worshiping the same God.
Good. So, Christians don't see themselves as kind of walking up a ladder in order to get to heaven. They recognize that they need God to enter into this world, to take us to himself, to take our humanity to himself, and deliver them into new lives. It's not credit, it's what Jesus Christ does for us.